Andrey, you are living in Estonia, in Tartu. Right. What is the attitude of the Estonian people towards Russian?
Well, the basic issues that are discussed in Estonian discourse, they have a very clear security background. Because after the 2000-year war in Georgia and the events in Ukraine, I mean the annexation of Crimea and support for military insurgency in eastern parts of the country, of course, Estonians started to take the Russian foreign policy in more kind of security-related concepts or terms, and this is what in fact constitutes one of the major, let's say, challenges to Estonia as a nation. Of course, it is protected as a NATO member under the Article 5, and it's the European Union member state. But still there are some concerns about Russian intentions, and we know that in the Baltic Sea region in general, Russian military presence is on the rise. So it creates a little bit different context in comparison to, let's say, 1990s, when Russia was perceived basically as, well, maybe not the best cooperative partner, but still a partner who can, maybe not now, but in the future, can share a lot with Estonia. Now these, let's say, expectations are gone, and the security issues are in the agenda, basically.
And how do they look like?
Well, this is basically about the state of the border and the border protection. This is about the border treaty that has a very long story of discussions and negotiations and ratification. Now there are some perspectives that this story will be finalized in the nearest future, and this is important because Russia and Estonia had already quite recently an incident with Estonian security guard who was allegedly kidnapped by the Russians, allegedly again according to the Estonian version, in the Estonian territory, and then he was sentenced in Russia for 15 years. So it creates, let's say, not the best background for relations between the two countries. So the regime of the border protection is, again, becomes one of the most, let's say, important security factor for Estonia. And in the meantime, Estonia also relies on security solidarity within NATO, because this is something which is a more political than technical issue, and that also defines one of the vectors in Estonian foreign policy.
How does the Estonian view on the history look like, and how does the Russian point of view look like?
Well, Estonians, they have a very, I would say, straightforward and very clear idea of the Soviet period as a period of occupation. It's an official discourse in Estonia. And unfortunately, this discourse is in a very clear contradiction to, let's say, Russian policy, historical policy, of Russia that either directly or indirectly, implicitly or explicitly denies the very fact of occupation. And denying the fact of occupation for Estonia is not something peripheral, it's not something marginal. This is what constitutes their feeling of national identity and the right for independence, for restored or revived independence. And unfortunately, these two positions, it's very hard to bridge the gap between the two. And of course, Estonian government and many Estonian political leaders are concerned about the fact that the Russian-speaking minority in Estonia, again, directly or indirectly, reproduces the Kremlin's discourse. So that also adds to this, feeling of insecurity in Estonia.
How did the members of the Soviet Union power, how did they manage to change the history or to have their own view on history during the decades?
You mean after the independence?
No, before, during the Soviet Union.
Well, during the Soviet Union, of course, the history was kind of rewritten, and it was official Soviet history that has been taught in Estonian schools, and in this part Estonia was completely incorporated into the Soviet discourse, which of course did not say a word about occupation. It in fact did not give any meaning to something which is tremendously important for countries like Estonia, I mean Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, etc., etc. So all these issues were completely kind of, obliterated, or I would say erased from the Soviet discourse, and it was only after the perestroika and the changes that led to the independence and the integration of the Soviet Union that these issues have been raised by Estonian historians and scholars and public activists. And I think one more very strong point of disagreements is the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Of course, since President of Russia once make a very clear comment saying that he does not think that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was something, which Russia has to be ashamed of. It was kind of normal. So there is a very clear tendency from the Russian side to normalize the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. While this is not a purely historical, let's say, thing for countries like Estonia and other Baltic states and Poland, I suspect, well, this is a very clear political message.
What is the need, maybe probably in today's Russia as well, this kind of treatment of history?
Well, I think Russia, in this sense, tries to play different games with history. On the one hand, yes, there is a legislation that rehabilitates the victims of political repressions, and this is one kind of, a very important stream in the Russian discourse, in the Russian society, and some NGOs like Memorial and others, they definitely contribute to this part of to this discourse. But in the meantime, this discourse is not, let's say, it's not dominant. It's not hegemonic. It's, well, I would say it becomes increasingly marginalized by a different type of attitudes towards history, which is completely glorified, which is completely politicized. And in fact, this is not history as something, let's say, academic or at least research-based. It's more, I would say it's a mythical meta-narrative. It's a story about a great country that never was defeated and that should not be ashamed for any single event in its history. So that would be the dominating narrative. I do understand why history is instrumentalized in Russia, and of course Russia is not unique in this sense. Many countries do that. But I'm a little bit concerned that this type of dominant attitude to history might prevent Russians from taking a more critical look at the past and raising those issues that do not, necessarily fit into this, glorified, completely, absolutely glorified story of Russian greatness.
But why there is such a huge effort in celebrating the 70th anniversary of the end of the World War II?
Well, because in Russia this is a political resource. Because Russia tries again to play different games on the level of narratives, on the level of discourse. On the one hand, using this anniversary, like other anniversaries, Russia tries to present itself as a European country, as a liberator, as a country that, almost quotation from Dmitry Medvedev's article in May, in which he said that without the Soviet Union, well, probably Europe would still look like, huge Nazi concentration camp. So it's kind of with all this naivete of this discourse, it's kind of invitation to accept Russia as a European country, but not in a normative sense. European in a sense like Stalin was a European politician sitting with Roosevelt and Churchill and deciding, the future of Europe, deciding, negotiating spheres of influence and other things. So in this sense, Russia wants to be part of Europe. It has nothing to do with Europe as a normative power. It has nothing to do with liberal democracy. It has nothing to do with reforms and changes in Russia from within. So it's a different type of desire to be accepted as full-fledged Europeans. So that's why, in this sense, this anniversary is one of the key, I would say, cornerstones in the Russian dominant discourse.
Actually, exactly the opposite is the result. Russia is far away from Europe. On your opinion, what could be done by Europe to bring the both countries together again?
You mean Europe,
Europe and Russia?
Well, it's a question how can you engage someone who does not want to be 100% engaged, or who wants to be engaged on conditions which are completely opposite to your worldview. I don't know. I don't think that Europe can do more than it did in these 20 and something years from 1991, because Europe did it, I mean, of course I overgeneralize, but Europe and the European Union, EU member states, they did a tremendous job to engage Russia. So when Russia says that, okay, we were marginalized, I would call it a kind of self-inflicting marginalization. So I don't think that Europe can do something beyond what it did already during these 2 decades. Europe invested a lot of resources in, sustaining these dialogues, creating sometimes, administratively, artificially, these playgrounds for this. All the infrastructure of dialogue was there. The result is, a gap, a divide. So taking into account this political investments in the dialogue, in the whole infrastructure of dialogue, I don't think that Europe can do something more than that. Maybe, of course, Europe needs to keep some communicative tracks open with those who would like to continue to talk to Europe. And even if they are few in Russia, well, I think these few are important because, even sociologically, of course, 80 and something % of approval rating of Putin sounds a little bit, pessimistic, but it means that at least from 10 to 15% of Russians have a different opinion, and this is a very important part of the society as such.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.